Beat Podcast wird euch präsentiert von Tascam.
They just approached me, kind of came with the idea of like what they wanted to do, and then naturally it kind of it ticked boxes for me in terms of being it, because I like the question that was essentially posed is what happens in our brain when we listen to music. What is it about music that kind of facilitates this connection and has this ability to bring people together on the dance floor? And I was like, no, I want to know the answer to that question. Like I like want to go on this journey. Like, you can't just pose a question to me and then have me wait to see the results from someone else. I guess the way that they pitched it triggered the inquisition in my scientist mind. So I was like, I guess I want to know this answer too. So but the idea originally came from the Pioneer team, the two directors, Lawrence Coe and Dan Tate.
And how was it filmed? How long of a timeline was there?
Essentially, it was give or take 2 years. So we did like a lot, like the majority of the filming during the space of 1 year. And then, we did some like little pickup pieces, some additions, some voiceover bits, like in the kind of final year. And then we just wanted to wait for the right time to kind of release it in the way that we wanted to release it. So I think there was like a few months gap between when we initially kind of finished it, like the final version that we wanted, versus like actually releasing it. And to be fair, we actually screened it, like one of the first iterations of the documentary at IMS, International Music Summit, last year. And then we kind of like made tweaks after that, that initial screening and adjustments and some small additions. But in total, from kind of like inception of idea to kind of like it being put out into the world, it was almost just over 2 years, I think.
Was the initial version longer, the one you eventually tweaked?
No, it was always good. It's supposed to be an hour, but I think there's a lot of I think every interview that we did was at least an hour long. Like there were some bits and pieces that didn't make it. So there's definitely a lot of material that didn't get used, but I think we were always going to try and keep it an hour. With attention spans dwindling, it's important to kind of get to the point with the message.
I would just so much love to hear the full interviews of many of these.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, the interview with Moody Man was fabulous. Even for me talking with certain scientists and kind of getting their perspective of things. Like certain community members, like there's amazing people doing amazing things across all industries that we got to chat to. And so, grateful that we had the experience. Maybe we can convince the team to do some behind the scenes extended cuts or something.
I really thought the one with the Forrest Brown Jr., I thought it was so different. The other ones, and so interesting. I really thought, man, I'd just die to hear more. I guess in the context, it made sense to restrict it to that, but I thought that wasn't a particularly great one. He's really knowledgeable, and I recommend his book, Assembling a Black Counterculture. I've also got it here. It's quite a heavy book in terms of like a lot of, you can tell it's like a well-researched, there's like a lot of citing and a lot of, background, a lot of history, a lot of interviews with some of the original creators of some of like Detroit techno and all of those kind of like Black American sounds. But there's a lot of insights. It's very, very kind of amazing to kind of see the history that we kind of connect with put together in such a in such a detailed and kind of well-researched way. So you said you really wanted to know what happens in the brain when we listen to music. A lot of the things, those are the things which are discussed, for example, the work that Julia Basso does. Basically, the knowledge that these things work, that there's a connection between the mind and movement and the body and conscience. These have been insights which different spiritual systems have had for thousands of years. Why do you think it's important that we also gather scientific evidence for this? I mean, why do we need to prove what we essentially know by intuition or from experience?
It's funny because I just wrote an opinion piece for Resident Advisor on exactly this. And I think, I mean, a lot at least from my perspective, maybe it's a controversial one. In fact, I know it's a controversial one with the comments on the post, on the Instagram post. Yeah. But I think that, you know, club culture has this reputation that's associated with, you know, hedonism, you know, consumption of substance, whether that be alcohol or drugs, you know, it being a public nuisance in terms of noise, in terms of, you know, rowdy crowds kind of invading these spaces. And I think it's important to kind of like understand with evidence, with empirical evidence, like how important it is to kind of have these environments and the kind of benefit that it brings to society in a world where it feels like everyone is getting more and more divided. I think it's, you know, valuable to have, you know, scientific evidence that points to tools that work to bringing people together. You know, like one of the references I made in the article, there's this guy, Arno, I can't remember what his second name is, but he was a former neo-Nazi in the American Midwest. And he talks about how he was, you know, part of his de-radicalization process was from raves in Chicago. You know, you have these environments that kind of like go against all of his, you know, preconceived notions of what society could look like, and seeing people kind of like enter these states of joy and this connection, like it kind of, you know, presents a paradox. And so I think it's a powerful tool, and it's one that we can come to kind of like convince society of our importance, particularly when club culture is in a moment of crisis. You know, things are getting incredibly expensive, people aren't going out as much, habits are changing, clubs are closing down. And so I think it kind of works to kind of have some sort of knowledge in our arsenal to help tackle, I guess this assault on club culture is important. And I mean, this is not to say that, like, I think even with clubs closing down and whatever, I think we'll always find ways to rave. But I think it would be nice to have more people on our side. Kind of, you know, Berlin has a relatively good policy, you know, with the club commission and Tag der Clubkultur, and, you know, kind of clubs being this cultural status to kind of recognize the value that it brings, not only to society, but us as individuals too. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's a long history of politicians using songs by artists for their campaign, which are and the entirely opposite spectrum of what they believe in. Exactly. I think Ronald Reagan wanted to use "Born in the USA" by Bruce Springsteen for his campaign, which is a completely it's a super left song about the demise of America and his skepticism about the grandness of the country. And talking about Berlin, for example, I think the danger, on the other hand, is if everything is supported by science, and if we make it a value proposition, I'm not just afraid that if you're looking for good investment, usually culture isn't it. You know, it's if you're going to say, are we going to build the Tempelhofer Feld full of luxury apartments, or are we going to build something there for the art, like an artist space? Usually the artist space is not gonna get the money. I'm totally support the project. I agree, and I think, for example, like the work that Julia Basso does, I think it can really benefit from scientific support and evidence. It's just it's a difficult balance, I sometimes think.
Absolutely. And I mean, some of the kind of like controversy with my article, which, you know, in fairness, I mean, I think a lot of the, not to sound, you know, like not to kind of push my communist agenda, but like a lot of the problems that club culture is facing is down to capitalism. And there is also this danger that when you kind of like put it to kind of make it sound like some like value proposition that, you know, big tech can invest in, you know, you kind of lose the essence of what it's about. I do think there are, you know, there's kind of new fields such as the neuro arts that kind of are emerging that can help, you know, looking at how dancing impacts treatments for Alzheimer's or mothers with postnatal depression, or, you know, like looking at how we can adapt ways of club culture. I think I'm a big believer that knowledge is power. Obviously, it's hard to kind of control who does what with that knowledge. And I mean, I also kind of see the struggles of how funding kind of for the arts and culture is always the first one on the chopping block. I run a radio station that is called Creativity Pioneers. Our radio station is called Aroka Radio, and we're part of a larger group of organizations
all around the world that are called creativity pioneers, and we're all using creativity as a tool for social change. So whether that's like theater groups in Ukraine or film schools in the Philippines, there's a recording studio in a jail in Cameroon, there's, you know, photography, you know, there's all these different initiatives that kind of believe in the power of creativity to kind of make a difference. And so, yeah, I do kind of like see this kind of like disparagement of the arts and culture, but at the same time, you know, like it's like it's a form of storytelling, it's a form of documentation, it's a form of expression, it's a form of political commentary, and I think it's just as essential. And I mean, if not, you know, working in tandem, like to have a well-rounded society, it's really, really important. I guess for me, a lot of the dangers come from like, because, you know, we can look back and see with hindsight the impact that kind of certain scenes, particularly club culture, has had on us today, whether that's new music genres, new artists, new industries, new infrastructures. But I don't know if those people had that vision then. So I just hope that now we can kind of like trust in the process a little bit and help guide it a little bit more. And also kind of, yeah, like have more of a long-term view to the impacts that club culture has. Because, yeah, people have been raving for thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, you know. It's like, I think it's a need, but not, I think it is a need. I know it's a need from the documentary. That, you know, we have as humans. So yeah, it's about how to kind of preserve that.
Also, I would argue that in many respects, probably the reason why club culture as such is going through a minor or major crisis is because it is so much infiltrated every other segment of the music industry. I think pop music today is simply dance music.
Yeah.
I can actually hear certain production techniques in metal because they were pioneered in techno and house and EDM. Even, I mean, you can argue about the creative value of EDM, but in terms of production, much of what happened there is part of hip hop culture now, and like production-wise, and so many other genres. So it's had an incredible influence on every like corner of the music industry.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, there's pros and cons to that. I think that's kind of like the natural progression of music anyways, to kind of like evolve and morph and kind of you know, accommodate storytelling. I think, you know, just with society, now this is where I do sound like an old head, but, you know, things like mobile phones and dance floors and like kind of people being afraid to dance and kind of like engage. I was talking with some friends about the art of shooting your shot, of, you know, being able to kind of go up to a stranger and strike up a conversation. Well, you know, it doesn't matter what the intention is, just being able to talk with strangers and engage with strangers in a way. I feel like that's a skill that people are losing, to be honest. And I think that these are also all factors that are kind of like making the club experience more difficult. You know, there's also kind of changing habits. You know, people don't want to stay up as late. People aren't consuming as much alcohol. And so I think there's also kind of thoughts around how we should adapt club culture to kind of meet these needs. Whether that's, you know, I for one would love earlier starts. I think, yeah, some of my best starts have always been, you know, on a Sunday afternoon or Sunday morning. I feel like at my best. And, you know, there's also health implications to staying up all night. And yeah, also, you know, more sober spaces, more alternatives. But it just kind of, it takes that imagination to kind of like look beyond what's existing, maybe also kind of step beyond the profit aspect, which, you know, in this day and age feels like it's impossible. But, you know, I guess I'm a big believer in doing it for the culture.
There's an interesting quote from an interview you did recently with Hausverbot, where they asked you, if you had to choose, like someone put a gun to your head, DJing or radio? And interestingly, you said, the way I understood it, radio, because it has a wider impact. That was really interesting to me as someone who's never had an interest in radio. I would really love to know more, especially in the light of your radio project, which seems absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because when I moved to Germany, I told people like that, because ever since I was 16 years old, I always wanted to be a radio presenter. And I think maybe kind of growing up in the UK, we have a very strong broadcasting culture with the BBC and, you know, national radio, national television. The programming is really, really strong and really kind of like well regarded. I don't know if I don't think it's the same in Germany, because when I moved here, people didn't understand why I wanted to be a radio presenter. But I think radio is always at the center of cultural innovation. Like reading DeForest Brown Jr.'s book, you kind of realize that if I think it's called Magic Roundabout, this radio station didn't exist, you know, you wouldn't have had people like Derek May, you know, the Belleville Three, finding the inspiration to kind of create techno, because they were kind of invited to imagine, you know, futures by this radio presenter. You know, it's the same for a lot of culture in the UK. You wouldn't have Graham, you wouldn't have Jungle, you wouldn't have Garage if it wasn't for these pirate radio stations. I feel like radio facilitates connection in so many ways, whether that's through listenership, people tuning into radio shows. In my experience, it also kind of facilitates in real life community. There's been so many instances where I've traveled to different corners of the world. I'm like, okay, like, how do I find my people? Okay, where's the local community radio station? You know, when I went to Japan, it was the same. When I went to Seoul in South Korea, that's where I found lifelong friends. You know, that's also kind of the vision for my radio station, Oroku Radio. And I was never really, I mean, you know, DJing, I think I'm really happy that I managed to start DJing before the pandemic, because I think it's morphed into something else now. It's like definitely like more on vogue. It's a lot more visual, you know, it's a lot more kind of content focused. It's a lot less about the music, or at least, you know, I feel, and I see it in like some of my sets, people are a lot less open to kind of being taken on this journey of storytelling, of like, okay, like playing music that I don't know. I mean, there definitely are spaces for that, definitely are festivals for that. But I think, you know, the wider perception of DJing is definitely kind of like these people who kind of, you know, want these big drops, are playing just like hits and bangers and stuff like that. And, you know, I just love sharing new music. I love understanding more about the background of music. I love having conversations with artists, learning about the inspiration. And I also love the thought of archives as well, sonic archives. I think also for me, coming from like a West African background, being Nigerian, there's this history across the continent of griots. So people who travel kind of with their storytelling and kind of like connecting communities through sound and through the music that they produce. And I feel like, I mean, DJing, yeah, to a certain extent, and also radio, they're both kind of modern forms of that. But I just feel like radio kind of forces that connection more. And it's also honestly a space for me to be more selfish as well. I can be like, well, I want to play this song because I think it's amazing. Like I can do that with DJ sets, but there's also this pressure to make people dance. And I don't feel that pressure with radio.
That's interesting. I never thought about it that way, but it makes complete sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially since, I mean, one of the big word of the documentary is community.
Yeah.
And I suppose a radio station has, like your radio station has a very concrete community in the sense that it has, I think there's a studio and there's a, what's it called, Surf Ghana. Yeah, Surf Ghana. So there's actually people on location, a group of people who know each other, who meet each other maybe on a daily basis. Well, as a DJ, you have to build that community every evening.
Yeah. And I mean, even with Oroku Radio, like, even though we have our community in Ghana, like our radio residents, because we're an internet radio station, we have over 300 residents across 50 different countries. So, and it's like kind of crazy to experience people feeling a part of that community. Like, so for example, I was in Brazil for 2 months at the beginning of the year. I remember being in Rio de Janeiro. I was wearing like the merchandise of my radio station, wearing a baseball cap, walking into the ocean with some friends. And like, this Brazilian girl stopped me. She was like, "Oh my gosh, Oroku Radio!" Like, and I was like, "What?" Like, I'm in Brazil. Like, and you know, she was like, she's also a DJ. She was like kind of super, because we have a bunch of residents in Brazil. You know, she'd seen our work. She felt super inspired, super connected because of like the vision for the station. You know, we've had the same. You know, I've gone to different places around the world, always representing the radio station. We've had so many people tell us how much they love what we do, and how much they resonate with the project. And so I think that's also how I first connected with radio as well. Like, I didn't necessarily like know the people in real life or like went to a physical space, but just through these broadcasts and like the way that they told stories and kind of like how they kind of like, I guess
disseminated new music and made me feel a part of something. It had like a profound impact on my life, and so it's cool to be able to like pay that forward, you know.
Do you think that the sense of the feeling of community that a great night at the club can generate, that this has become somewhat harder as the role of the DJ has changed? I don't know if and how far this is true for yourself, but I would say, whether or not it's good or bad, but if a DJ now stands in front of the audience and isn't like the DJ booth is no longer in the corner of the club and so somewhat maybe even in darkness, and the DJ is part of the community, I would suppose it's a different experience where it's much easier to just tap in for a night and go back, while the other one invites long-term commitment.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I'm maybe a controversial opinion. I like having the DJ booth in front of the crowd, not for kind of like egotistical reasons, but for functional ones. Like I like to be able to interact with the crowd, you know, be able to read reactions, to adapt my DJ sets. But like, I don't know, I guess it's never like, I guess what has shifted also now, when I started DJing, it was never about me, it's about the music, you know, like that's what it was about for me. And I guess, you know, with a lot of streams becoming more popular, social media clips, you know, in environments where people are allowed to kind of bring out their phones and film, also where DJ sets are quite short, there is this kind of like needs or desire to kind of capture attention and like both in terms of like capture the attention of people, but also capture attention of people online as well. So it kind of shifts the environment. I like longer sets. I like because I think I play quite often in Panorama Bar, and like I always have this moment of like, okay, when you're changing over from the other DJ, all of the sets are at least 4 hours. There's this moment of like, okay, the dance floor kind of empties because, you know, everyone's going to the toilet, getting their drinks. And it's like, I think it's an important exercise to do of like, okay, you feel this pressure of like, I need to like galvanize the people as soon as possible. But like, it's a journey, you know, I can't come in hot for like, you know, during the first 30 minutes because we've got 4 hours to go. I need to leave space to breathe. And so like, it's like an exercise in checking your ego of like, yeah, people are going to leave, but like, you know, eventually they'll come back. And so I think, yeah, it's all about understanding what kind of environments kind of keep the focus on music and connection, you know? Like, I also find that when you don't have, you know, the spotlights on the DJ booth or, you know, all these cameras or whatever, you know, people will naturally turn their back or, you know, will kind of like move around or like interact with one another. I think that's like the natural thing that happens on the dance floor when you kind of build an environment that allows for that. Yeah, I'm a big fan of, if you can't tell, I'm a big fan of no phones on the dance floor. It also makes me feel uncomfortable. Like there's nothing worse than having someone like shine like their flashlight on you. Like it's like, okay, if I did that when you were working, like how would you feel if I just stood there like with a flashlight filming you work? Like it's kind of uncomfortable, but yeah, I guess it's kind of the name of the game these days.
So you have people like Moody Man in the documentary who says the dance floor is the place where everyone can meet and come together. And I think the Seth Troxler said, like, for one night, doesn't matter who you are. And then I gather maybe from some other comments, maybe even from DeForest Brown Jr., saying that there is music, you can't see music just as music. It's always connected to a certain culture. And I remember an interview I did a long time ago with Tara Temnitz for the 120 Midtown Blues album, where there's a track called Madonna Free Zone. And he really criticized this idea of one culture just taking bits from, let's say, house music, taking it into commercial territory and just using it as music, while there is more behind it, there's a community behind it. So I guess what I'm really interested in is your view of, on the one hand, music is an invitation for everyone to come together, and then the other one is music is a place where people can be, like, there's a safe space where you can be who you are amongst other people who will understand who you are.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think it's, again, another controversial opinion. I mean, maybe let me preface it with, I don't think all club culture is the same. Like, I think different spaces exist for different purposes. And I actually do kind of believe that not everyone should be included in the space, including myself. I think there's certain spaces that aren't necessarily for me.
that don't serve any kind of purpose for me and aren't necessarily appropriate for me to be in. And I think that's for kind of like other places, you know, in Madonna's case, a lot of what she took was from, you know, black and brown trans culture. You know, a lot of the kind of like voguing elements were kind of extracted from their context of why they were created in the first place, because people were kind of rejected from society and had to form their own family structures. And she kind of took that and ran with it and erased that context. And I think that's very dangerous. You know, even like the perfect example, look at all the book burning that's happening in the United States, all of this kind of like rejection of its history. And you kind of see like what happens when people aren't able to connect with like why things happen. I do think I look at a lot of club culture that kind of like sets expectations before people enter the space. So, you know, people have door policies, they have selectors, they have like house rules of like, okay, if you're entering this space, this is how we expect you to behave and how to interact with one another. I think that's a very good way of kind of like gathering an understanding of what of like how people should behave in the space and how that can kind of facilitate connection. You know, at the same time, like, you know, I'm a woman, I'm never going to go to snacks at Berkheim. You know, that's specifically for gay men, you know? So it's like, I do think there should be specific spaces reserved for specific people, but I do love to see the ability of, you know, when you have a group of people that come with a common understanding or a common love, whether that's for great sound or great performances or to be taken on a journey or to lose themselves in music. I think that kind of like brings a certain, you know, type of people together and kind of bring an amazing experience together. Some of my best friends have been made on dance floors just because of that. And yeah, I'm very grateful for it. And I think that's an incredibly powerful environment. But yeah, I would say that like in certain cases, special circumstances, dance floors shouldn't necessarily be for everyone. And I think that also kind of it's for us to kind of reconcile with like rejection in a sense, like being able to say like, hey, you know what, this space isn't for me, and I'm okay with that. I just find the space that is, or build a space of my own that is for me as well.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I mean, that's the idea. Maybe like Berlin was called the land of endless guest lists, and maybe there's something to making those guest lists shorter. So it's actually really about the people who really, really want to get in.
Exactly. Which, you know, not every time it's going to be right, you know, and a lot of the times there's going to be problems associated with that, whether that's, you know, like racist door policies, homophobic or transphobic door policies. It's not like a perfect world, and there are issues with it. But I also see the benefits for it too. I don't know if there's a simple answer to it. I've definitely kind of like, you know, looked at a guest list request and been like, okay, like how is this person going to serve this space? You know what I mean? Do I as a DJ have a responsibility to preserve like, you know, are they essentially going to behave themselves? Are they going to kind of contribute to this kind of communal space, or is it going to kind of like disrupt the harmony? I don't know if that sounds like I'm reading way too much into it, but like, I feel like there is a certain responsibility, you know, like in terms of guest lists and who you invite into a space, of understanding like, okay, what is the space for? How are they going to kind of like affect that space? And, you know, what kind of energy are they going to bring, you know?
But wouldn't you say that most DJs see that responsibility? And I think maybe too few guests see that responsibility, because ultimately, I mean, if you have a club, you have 300, 400 dancers and you have one DJ. So maybe if it's a great party, it's just as much responsibility of 400 dancers as it is of the one person spinning the music.
Absolutely. And I do think, you know, I see kind of like dancers taking responsibility for people and kind of like holding people accountable. But, you know, everyone, I guess we're all kind of so different in our context and our backgrounds and our reactions to certain things, that it's going to be impossible to, you know, like I think a lot of people, for example, don't use even the term safe space anymore because it's impossible to ensure safety. But it's more about like intentional spaces or safer spaces, like what kind of mechanisms and kind of like procedures or kind of intentions can you put in place that, you know, as much as possible, facilitate, you know, an amazing environment. But in case things do go wrong, how do you react to that? How do you respond to that? You know, so it's a tough one.
I suppose also, I mean, maybe just from a personal point of view, I think my biggest moment on the dance floor was when a DJ at a university event played Experience by Hardfloor. And that was the first time I heard acid, and it blew me away. It was so different. And I think it was a courageous thing by the DJ to do that, because this was a big event and it was made mostly like people who would maybe listen to commercial trance music. And in between, he just played this one piece, which changed my life. And then I think sometimes you have to go to that place, because I think somewhere in the documentary it also says that it's about letting go and letting the body take over. And that can only happen if you do something that goes against the expectations which are set by the mind, like the conscious, the intellect.
Absolutely. And I'm a really big fan of that in my sets. Like that's actually my philosophy, and that's what kind of like I'm known for, like injecting the unexpected in my sets. Like when people ask me what music I play, I'm like, you know, if you can dance to what I play. You know, I've played sets where, you know, it's been like mainly house, and I've dropped merengue, I've dropped you know, jazz, I've played all, like, across all spectrums, and you kind of have these moments of surprise of like, is she really doing this? And I think honestly one of the biggest compliments for me is when someone comes up to me and is like, normally I don't listen to this kind of music, or I don't listen to that, but the way that you played it, like, it made sense, or it connected with me in a certain way. And I understand that, you know, there's people who are purists or who don't kind of resonate with that style of playing. But as I say, like, there's a DJ for everyone. And I think that's the reason I always say that, like, DJing and music in general, in terms of music, people's music taste, is a form of storytelling. You know, I'm essentially telling you the story of my life through sound, because it's all of these songs that have resonated with me through different means, you know, genres or rhythms or tones that kind of connect with me because of my life experiences. And so I feel like it would be doing myself a disservice if I just stuck to one facet, because it's like my music taste is so much broader than that. And I think I can say, I don't know if it sounds arrogant, but I think I have the skill to be able to like weave that tapestry together in an interesting way. So yeah, I'm a big fan of kind of like dropping these nuggets, moments of surprise. And yeah, I also kind of like to do it sometimes to irritate the techno purists as well. Like, why is she playing this song? You know, I'm like, yeah, because I want to.
I actually think that Panorama Bar is a great place for that. I think it's pretty open.
Exactly. It feels like a second home at this point. Like, I really love playing there.
Do you this word synchronization, which also comes up in We Become One? Do you experience that as a DJ? And if so, how does like the idea of synchronizing with the audience? How does that feel like? Is that is there a tension in the air? Is that when things interlock? What's that experience like?
It's hard to describe. I mean, I think it's just kind of like the only phrase that kind of resonates with me is like locked in. I'm like locked in to whatever. Like, I feel like I can read the crowd incredibly well. I feel like, you know, in terms of reactions to certain rhythms and certain sounds, I know what they want next. There's like kind of like a mutual understanding of what we want to hear and where the journey is going, and like kind of just like letting go. You know, it's more interesting to observe synchronization of the crowd with each other. You know, people kind of like moving together. You know, moments of kind of like dancing. You know, like another class. I've never seen it on the dance floor, but I think of the Mexican wave. You know, like you have one person doing a movement and then kind of like translate across. Or you know, I have a lot of friends in the voguing ballroom community, and obviously that kind of like intersects very strongly with club culture. So, you know, sometimes they come to my sets and they have those kind of collective moments. And so, yeah, like I think that is kind of like this symbiotic relationship between the DJ with the dancers, but then also with the dancers with each other. Even, you know, always got to shout out the lighting technician as well, because they always like, you know, I think amazing lights really kind of make or break a good club night. And there's that kind of like synchronization with us, them kind of like interpreting the music and, you know, bringing in these moments of drops and whatever. And so, yeah, it's kind of like this like big transmission, this big connection, like this wireless connection that's kind of like happening, that I think everyone both feeds into, but also gets something from.
You also get this sensation that the audience is telling you in a way what to play next?
Absolutely. It's like, you know, especially when I go into environments where it's like, okay, I don't know, because, you know, the music that I play is so broad. So sometimes I'm like, I don't know what the expectation is for me here. Like, I don't know what people expect me to play, or what kind of, you know, I could play, because another big love of mine is jungle and drum and bass, but I can't necessarily play that all the time, because, you know, it doesn't necessarily resonate with some people. So like, you know, I kind of like throw in testers, like, okay, like, you know, I also kind of can get an inclination from culture. So sometimes if I'm going to a new place, like last year I played in Kazakhstan, so I did my research in terms to kind of like the music, the tradition, the rhythms. I know that, for example, in Brazil, when I was touring there, a lot of the rhythms that kind of exist in Brazilian music are kind of the same as that exists in West African music. So I know that I can maybe get a little bit more rhythmic, a little more syncopation, more percussive. That syncopation doesn't necessarily work so well in Germany. You know, I think people have to work a little harder to kind of like explore beyond like the 4/4 rhythm. So I think, you know, kind of like dropping in, okay, how do people react to this sound? Okay, is there like more dynamicism? Are people moving more? Is there any whoops, any claps, like hand raisings, like smiles? Okay, this seems to be a direction that people want to go. Conversely, like, are people just kind of like swaying, like looking bored, like not really into it? Like, how do I kind of drop in those nuggets that can help guide me to see those reactions of how I'm going to go on that journey, you know?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about Germany, because in the documentary, one of the guys says, one of the interviewees says, it's like dancing to algebra.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of German techno, and it's not very complex algebra in that sense.
Although there are kind of, you know, like polyrhythms and triplets. I think where with German techno, there's always just like a 4/4 kick drum. But I think there can be some complexities around that. And I do think that, you know, I've had people come up to me from sets in Germany to say, "Whoo, like you made me work." Like I had to kind of like, because a lot of like the music that I play, that like 4/4 beat is like inferred. It's not actually. You have to kind of read between the lines to kind of find it. And they were like, "Oh, like I was having to work to kind of find it." But I think that's kind of, you know, interesting for some people. But I do think, you know, there's some moments where, because I'm a big fan of rhythm. I really love percussion. I was like learning how to drum for a while. And so yeah, I do see that those elements also in a lot of kind of like traditionally German techno, you know.
Yeah, a lot of the big Detroit pioneers, they were drummers.
Yeah,
Jeff Mills was a drummer. Makes complete sense.
Yeah.
To me. So maybe because we've been speaking almost an hour, we can. There's maybe it's 3 questions I think I have, maybe sort of loosely connected to the documentary on the topics. So you mentioned one of the goals of this project was to show that music, and club music especially, can be more than hedonism. I mean, maybe hedonism isn't necessarily bad anyway, but from your experience, is there still today this possibility of like, if you completely surrender to something which is part of hedonism, to break the inertia and then sort of the routines of daily life, is that still something you experience in club culture? Because that is, of course, in itself already an argument in favor of the ongoing relevance of this culture.
Could you repeat the question, just the first part again, just to make sure I understood?
Yeah, I think because we talked about this idea of hedonism, and that it's been used as a criticism of club culture. While on the other hand, hedonism in itself, even outside of any scientific considerations, means surrendering completely to something without questioning it, which allows for to break routines, like fixed routines, and allows new paths to open.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, I think hedonism definitely can be a good thing and is a good thing. I think a lot of the kind of connotations of hedonism that kind of have this negative association are probably is kind of just rooted in classism, maybe racism as well. Like, because of the people that are partaking in hedonism, I'm sure if you look behind some of these closed doors of politicians and, you know, celebrities. There's all sorts of hedonism going on, and like, you know, whether you call it hedonism, whether it's a kind of like a state of flow, I think there's definitely a benefit to letting go and surrendering to something completely. I definitely agree. I guess it's just how you frame it, you know, for lack of a better word, it's the marketing behind it. You know, I think when, yeah, as I say, like when, you know, clubbing comes from working class roots, it comes from DIY, you know, motivation. Again, Berlin has such a rich history of that, of people just being like, I'm going to take over this space. I want to throw a party. Even when I first moved to Berlin, I definitely, maybe I'm also a little bit more out of the scene, but when I first moved to Berlin, or even before I moved, like I think I just had some friends here, they would take me to parties in like abandoned, I think I went to one in like an abandoned Netto, and like I was like so blown away. It was like Janowitzbrücke, and they completely like soundproofed the entire space. There were like 5 floors. You know, there was like a ball pit that was like, you know, one like shaped like a beach. It was like so loud, but you couldn't really hear it from outside. They knew that the space was going to be demolished in 4 weeks, so it was just like a pop-up club. But they did four weeks of partying, and it was like such a surreal experience and such a creative experience. But I guess, yeah, like the motivation is to put together an amazing experience that kind of connects with people, and that isn't necessarily delineated by class or financial status or whatever. And so I guess but when you kind of like, I guess people see the danger of that, you know, people see the danger of what happens when you have everyone letting go, what happens when you have people galvanized by music. I mean, you see so many instances of countries around the world. I've spoken about Brazil loads. They made samba and other kind of drumming illegal because they recognize that power. Other music is considered illegal because they see what it kind of like brings out in people. You know, even genres, rock, punk, hip hop, they've all had some sort of kind of like, the blues. I've just watched the movie Sinners, you know, that was considered the devil's music. People understand the power of what it is when you have people gathered in a space, kind of like disconnected from all the social markers and just kind of like letting go. And maybe there's a fear of that. So yeah, I guess, yeah, I'm a hedonistic girl. I can't lie. I like to do it within reason, and you know, because it's kind of my job. You know, I still like to get early nights. I'm essentially sober, so apart from, you know, the odd tequila shot here and there, but just to kind of like my own longevity. But that doesn't mean that like I'm not hedonistic in the sense that I love to go to spaces and just completely lose myself in the music, you know, just completely let go, feel free, dance like nobody's watching. I think there's something incredibly meditative about that experience.
Are you in, maybe as a closing question, are you in favor of trying to make that more political, like the power generated on a club night? I sometimes think if you could somehow channel that and make everyone actually do something about their lives and maybe our lives, or is it really this, should music remain something private, almost like something intimate, the offline, this idea of being offline from the world for one night?
Another great question. It's a difficult one because I do think music and club culture is inherently political. Like, I don't, you know, people who say keep the politics off the dance floor, like the dance floor is politics and politics is the dance floor. Like, I think by making those kind of like, you know, dismissive statements, you fundamentally don't understand what club culture is. That being said, like, it also is a place of escape, you know, for people who encounter, that's where a lot of the history of club culture comes from, in terms of people building spaces for themselves where, you know, in a space where, in a country or a society where they're constantly discriminated against or experience violence in all different forms, they wanted to build a space where they can be free of that, be free of the politics, be free of the associations. And so, yeah, maybe it's a cop-out question, but maybe a cop-out answer, but maybe I'll say there's different contexts for different spaces, and I think that it's important to maintain balance with everything, you know, as I think it is an incredibly powerful tool that could be a political one, but I think also, you know, as someone that's constantly working, constantly galvanized, and has you know, been exhausted by
campaigns or trying to make people understand or trying to use, you know, music for kind of political means, it's so important to be able to kind of disconnect from that. And so not every dance floor has to be political. No, let me rephrase that. Every dance floor is political, but we don't have to inject that in the way that we move on the dance floor. Does that make sense? I don't know if that
I think it's a space without words, and so if you try to put words into it, you automatically take away from the experience, even though the experience is there, it's real. But in a way, you have to become poetic. You have to become a poet to write about music in a way that doesn't take away, it doesn't detract from it.
Exactly. It's a cultural experience as well. You know, you have theaters that put on political plays. You have theaters that do plays that are silly, that are whimsical, plays that are for children, plays that are for whatever. Like the medium in itself is, you know, has its history, has its roots, but like what kind of happens in that space depends on who it's bringing together and what the intentions are for that space. And I think that's the same for club culture.